Hi everyone, hope you're doing great. This is Maro. In today's video, I wanted to talk about Smaland. I got the ship, my impressions, share some hard data on the ship and how the good players and the bad players do in her, and hopefully just give you a little more insight into the ship as you think A, should I get the ship? And B, the way I play the ship, maybe there is some room of improvement, and perhaps you can learn from my mistakes because for me that's not an easy part to do. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. So with that, let's get into it. So I did it. I am 2 million XP poorer. I went and I acquired me a Smaland, and I like the ship. Think it's a fun ship to play. But the reason I hesitated to get the ship in the first place is a 2 million free XP. It just seems like a very big amount to spend on one ship. So although I had the free XP, I wasn't too keen to spend it. And I think the other was my kind of impression or expectation that may not necessarily be the easiest ship to play. Now, I enjoy the pan-European destroyer line, and honestly, I like the Tier 9 Ostergotland more than Holland, and I think I did a lot better in that ship than I did in Holland. So, comparing Smaland to Holland, you kind of see that there aren't that many differences between the two ships. Especially if you select the same modules and you use the same captain build, you tend to have very few differences between the two ships. So for example, I think one difference would be range. Smaland has 1k range advantage. The guns go out to 11.45 versus 10.45 for Holland. So that's 1 kilometer. A Smaland has maybe around 20% DPM advantage in HE and AP on Holland. So that's the other difference. I guess the third difference would be torps, and this is where Holland has advantage on Smaland. Holland has 10-15 kilometer torps versus only 8 12 kilometer torps for Smaland. So 2 more torps and longer range. The reload time about the same, 100 seconds. Torpedo speed, Holland has torps that are 10 knots faster. Then we have the Aaa Defense. They have the same Aaa Defense, except for the fact that Holland has DFAA and Smaland does not. So once you add the DFAA, then Holland is even more powerful. Survivability, same number of hit points out of the box, 22,700, and each of them have 4 heals, 14 seconds, so 1%, so 14% basically per heal, health regeneration. So same thing. Concealment, Holland is 150 meters better, 599 versus 614 for Smaland. Maneuverability, same speed, same turning circle radius, same rudder shift time. And then the difference, another difference, obviously the big one, is the consumables. Smaland gets a radar instead of the DFAA, effectively. And it also has a speed boost, but a more powerful speed boost. So Holland's speed boost is the typical 8%, 120-second reload time, and I guess 156-second action time. And this is with the special engine boost modification one, so it's the call upgrade in the second slot. But Smaland's engine boost is 30% increase in speed, but it only lasts 78 seconds, which is basically half of the Holland's. So half as long, but much bigger boost. And I guess where it really comes into play with Smaland is acceleration, deceleration. So big advantage there. And then in terms of radar, Smaland has 7.5K radar, 4 consumables with the superintendent, and it lasts 20 seconds. And that's it. So slightly higher DPM, slightly longer range on your guns, slightly less torps, less range, and 2 torps less. AA, you're a little weaker, but not too bad. And then you have this unique speed boost, and you have a radar. So now that I've played Smaland, I think I played maybe 20, 25 games. I think it offers somewhat of a unique gameplay. And the reason I said it, obviously, it's the radar, and it's obviously the DPM. It's quite enjoyable to fire those guns really fast. It's also quite enjoyable to start some fires on the bigger targets when you have that speed boost on. It allows you to be able to dodge better. Obviously, you still need to pay attention to what you're doing, and if you don't, you'll be punished for it. But then you also have the heals, so you can absorb some of that damage. I think in terms of torps, honestly, I haven't had a lot of success, and these torps don't really do a lot of damage. So yeah, when you hit some ships, you score some damage, but it's not really a knockout blow. I think the speed out of the box with the speed flag is 36.8 knots, and that's not too fast, so you're somewhat limited on that front. And I think also the speed of the guns and just the arc, it gets quite difficult for me to hit targets that are maneuvering, that are at a distance, and maybe it's a matter of getting used to, and maybe it's a matter of just being good enough, right? So, but I've seen myself struggle with that, and I have a high rate of fire, but you still need to land those shots for them to count, right? Otherwise, all I'm doing is just spraying the enemy. So that's in terms of gameplay. And I think here, chasing the opponents and trying to want to use that radar has led me many times to my death. But the point is, by having that radar, you rush into the caps, and then you rush after the DDs, and then you may get drawn to the other ships on their team that are supporting the DD, and you find yourself still absorbing a lot of damage. So I think once I've learned, and it seems I learn this every time, just a slow learner, but once I learned to be cautious, to be careful, to not rush, I've seen better results. I think it's still too early to call in terms of long-term trend, but it says that with the tools you have and the patience that you need, you cannot just change how you play destroyers and start playing them differently because you think that they have these inherent strengths without either necessarily have the skill or being very judicious about how you take advantage of the situation, which I guess always applies. But I think the transition between playing a Gearing or playing a Sommers to playing a Smaland is is not easy, and it's not a seamless transition. What it is, it's a different set of skills and a different playstyle that's required that makes it harder and more difficult to come out ahead, and something to keep in mind. It may not necessarily be as challenging as it is for Marceau, but it still has its own challenges that the player should keep in mind. And if you expect that you will get this ship and you will be doing as well as maybe the popular view would have it, unless you are a good player, especially with more of a gunboat destroyer type, you will not. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't get the ship. if you have the free XP and you enjoy playing destroyers, because over time you may get better at it, so that's a plus. And B, the ship is being pulled out of the game, and we don't know when it will be back. Now, that could be just a marketing ploy and a tactic in terms of boosting the numbers and also pushing players to spend the free XP and get the ship. I looked at the third quarter data from the MapleSyrup data site. I'll include the link to the site in the description below, but what the site offers is a lot of data on averages by the ship class, in terms of experience, winning, damage, and so on. And looking at those numbers, I think for the third quarter of 2020, I think there were maybe around 6 or 7,000 players that played Smaland. And as of fourth quarter of 2020, there were around 12 or so thousand. So that's a pretty big increase. I'm not sure when these numbers started to change, and if it's people that already have Smaland that have been playing her more, or is it that people just went and spent their free XP because they know the ship is leaving and now are playing her more. Could be either one. In any case, a lot more ships, and if I had to guess, I would say it's probably leaning more towards people actually doing what I did here. If you were on the fence and you were not sure, but you had the free XP or you needed some to get there, you've gotten there and you've decided to pull the trigger. So I think that's a lot of me just sharing some of my thoughts and impressions around the ship. I think another thing that I wanted to do is go over some of the stats that I actually got from the MapleSyrup site, and these stats are for the fourth quarter. Quite a lot of them are descriptive in nature, and they will just say this is how many players have played the ship in the quarter, this is how many battles they had, and that just tells you how popular the ship is or how many players were able to obtain the ship, right? I think when it comes to a premium ship, it will tend to be more that than just, playing the game, working through the trees and getting a Tech 3 ship. And then the other set of stats has to do with damage, has to do with the experience, has to do with the ships destroyed, planes destroyed, and so on. And I think what that does is just tells you how different the ships are in terms of, ship by ship. Some ships excel in one thing, some ships in the other. I think if you have higher damage numbers, what that typically suggests is that you're able to do a lot more farming of the bigger ships. If you're just hunting destroyers, there is only so much health that you can get, even if the experience that you earn is a lot higher. Something to keep in mind. Also, what type of damage are you inflicting? Is it guns or is it torps? What tends to happen is the gunboating in general is more difficult in the game, and it's more difficult because in order to destroy a ship, you need to shoot your guns. When you shoot your guns, everybody sees you. When everybody sees you, they shoot at you. So you have to be careful about choosing the situations when you do that. And if you're not positioned well, or if you're not careful enough, you are not necessarily long enough to really set some high damage numbers. That's why gunboating would appear to be a lot more difficult than just playing torpedo boats, where you're in stealth. So yes, you will fire your torp salvo, and either they will hit or they will not, but you will not reveal your position. And if nobody is around to spot you, or there is no radar or the CV, then you can just wait until your torps reload and try again. So you minimize your exposure and the risk to your ship, which allows you to maybe rack up more damage, right? Which is important. B, you don't risk your ship, which is also important. And, depending on what ship you're playing, some of those torps can be quite heavy hitting and do a lot of damage. So allows you to also perhaps sink ships. And I think that's very important. Doing damage is one thing, but actually taking ships off the board is another, and that's a thing that is probably one of the most important things in the game. And if you're shooting at a ship to finish her off, especially a bigger ship, that may take a while and it may be harder to do. If you are able to land a good torp salvo, you may be able to take a ship in one strike. So again, I think that's perhaps why gunboating is a lot more difficult than just playing a torp ship. So I also have a few stats from the MapleSyrup site looking at those. And the way I went about that was I took a look at the classes. Now the MapleSyrup site breaks down their quarterly stats by class of player. So you will have for everyone that played on the server, and you have North American, Asian, European, Russia, right? And then you have for the players that have winning rate 65 and over, that have 55 to 64, that would be Class B. Then Class C, which is around 45 to 54. And then D and E. And E is, I think, somewhere below 30% winning rate. And what I did was I looked at Class A, so that's the best players, and Class C, the worst players, in terms of winning record, right? So your win rate at least. And I looked at the difference between damage, so what's the multiple in terms of times of damage that the best players did, or the ones that with the win rate over 65, and the ones that have the least. And I use that as a proxy for just how difficult it is for players that are not as good. And here I'm making the assumption that if your win rate is poor, you're not as good. How difficult it is to play the ship and get the same results. So there are some areas where player skill matters little. And I think those could be, for example, planes destroyed, right? Because that's really a mechanic that's outside the player control. So player has limited say in it. And as a result, it's almost just a matter of how long you're around and how many planes there are that the ship encounters. Another one is accuracy, gun accuracy, which is kind of interesting, but at least I think for the destroyers. The difference is not necessarily as big as I would have thought. And when I look at those stats, it tells me that more or less we are all within maybe the acceptable range of accuracy. Now, maybe you're 20% worse than the best players, but some other categories that percentage difference is a lot more. So being 20% off, it's great in comparison. And if you're thinking about, well, I'm gonna look at these and think about what are the areas that I can improve in, then some other ones that have this wider difference would be the best areas that you would look to improve. Because if you shrink some of that gap even by a little, the improvement may be more versus trying to shrink an area where the difference is small by a little. I also think it's important to highlight that in terms of winning, it's kind of equally hard across all the ships, or the difference between the good players and the bad players is kind of the same. I mean, it varies from like 170 to 150. So other values could be from, 20, 30% to 150. Here, they're all kind of in the same boat. So the area of improvement is equally distant regardless of the ship between the weakest player and the best player. So here you can see some of the stats by class in the MapleSyrup data. This is for Smaland, so class A, B, C, D, E. These are different win rates. Win percentage, how it differs from A to E. Experience, damage, ships destroyed, planes destroyed, base capture, base defense, survived, kill death, potential damage, spotting damage, accuracy. And then what I did, I took my stats from Pro Ships site for the 25 battles that I played in Smaland. And so you can see my win percentage, 44. It's pretty low. It's close to D. Experience, close to C, which I guess would be somewhere around average. If C, you think of C as an average class. Damage, 53, so it gets me closer to B. Ships destroyed, I'm around C. Planes destroyed, 4. Now, that's a low number, but mostly the reason for that is I didn't really have a lot of CV games, which is good, but unusual. Base capture, and that's where I did really poorly. And base defense, it's okay, but base capture, I mean, that's like off the charts poor. And I think the reason for that is I would get drawn into trying to start fires or fights with bigger ships and didn't necessarily worry as much about caps. And I think depending on what players' data you examine and what their build is, if their build is centered around being a gunboat, getting an extended range, not necessarily worrying as much about concealment, then they will not go after the caps, but they will have a lot higher damage numbers because they'll be able to do a lot more damage to the ships. My build is really centered again on concealment and going after caps and destroyers, but in terms of play, I would get distracted and engage in a playstyle that wasn't necessarily fit for the build, and I think you can see that in terms of cap numbers, which are super poor. And then again, probably a large part of that is tied to the, well, maybe not large part, but to some extent, it should be tied to the win number as well. And then potential damage survival, I think, is another interesting stat, 60%. And I think it just tells you me being overly cautious, really, in the way I'm playing the ship. I survive a lot, but I don't necessarily do as much damage as I should. Or if I do, it's average damage, but way over the average survival rate. And then potential damage, again, low, because it tells you that I'm not engaged in a lot of firefights, which I perhaps should be. Spotting damage, again, close to B, so that's okay. I guess I do spot for my team. And then accuracy on the lower end, and again, that could be somewhat linked to the fact that some of these gunfights were in connection with larger ships, trying to do them at the edge of my range, which is around 11.3 in this build. But then I went and found the highest win rate on North American server was a player called Fuzzballs. So Fuzzballs had, I don't know, maybe 80, 90 games and 83% win rate, damage 84,000. So that's a pretty high damage, average damage. Ships destroyed 1.8. Base capture a lot higher, so it tells me he's working the caps, unlike some other players who may even have higher damage numbers but are more around the gunboat to build. Survived, pretty high rate as well, 61%. Kill to that, obviously a lot higher than mine, given that A, you kill more ships and you survive the same. Potential damage, 723. So again, more aggressive, more exposed, more visible. Spotting damage, higher. And I guess that also has to do with not just being around, but also your positioning and ability to contribute to the team. And then accuracy, 52%, which is pretty impressive, which again would suggest more destroyer hunting roles where the distances are closer for you to be able to have such accuracy ratios. So the reason I do this is just to kind of identify broadly the differences between my own gameplay and what I'm doing, and maybe areas that I need to pay more attention to, and also just to see what the other players on the server are doing as well, because sometimes the class numbers, they mute the differences and you don't necessarily see what the different builds are. And here in case of Smaland, it would suggest that there are two ways of playing the ship, one more traditional and the other one, I guess, also traditional but more gunboating in the open, doing a lot more damage versus doing destroyer things. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions. I think I've done a few videos using the MapleSyrup data source, and I kind of forget that someone may be coming and seeing this video for the very first time and maybe a little lost sometimes. So I think I need to get better into just repeating and explaining what it is that I'm doing and why. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to just drop me a question in the comment. More than happy to give you an answer if I can, or at least explain what I'm doing, which I should be able to do hopefully with no problems. And I think with that, come to the end of this video. I think the purpose of this video was really just to share some of my impressions of the ship, share some of the stats and what do those numbers mean, and just give you more information as you think about, do I want to spend 2 million free XP if I have it, or do I want to work really hard to try to get the number I need before I can buy the ship? So another a little more quantifiable point of view. I hope it's helpful to you. I hope you found the video entertaining. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. With that, I wish you the best of luck on the high seas. Maro out.